They waited until I wired the final $1.2 million from my personal account into the team's training facility renovation fund. Then, the same guys I called brothers for 8 seasons voted 7-4 in a secret meeting to recommend the club terminate my captaincy and block the $4.8 million extension I had already signed, freezing every dime the league owed me and leaving me staring at a $312,000 lien on my house by morning. What they didn't count on was the paper trail I kept from day one. My name is Marcus Hale. For 8 years, I was the #1 star and captain of Carolina Vanguard FC in Major League Soccer. I led this club from the bottom of the Eastern Conference to back-to-back playoff appearances. I never missed a single training session, never turned down a community event, and never once put my own brand deals ahead of the team. That night in late October, after the final whistle of our last home game, I sat in the locker room thinking the hard part was finally over. The new contract was signed, the extension clause activated, and the front office had already deposited the first $850,000 signing bonus into my escrow account. I even transferred that last $1.2 million from my own endorsement pool because the owner said the facility upgrade was non-negotiable if we wanted to keep our designated player status. I drove home that evening with the windows down, radio off, already planning the off-season recovery program I would run for the younger guys. Then my phone started buzzing non-stop. First it was my agent, then the team accountant. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the bank had already flagged 3 incoming wires as disputed. The club had issued an emergency hold citing, quote, breach of leadership standards. My lawyer later told me the exact timestamp, 9:47 p.m. That was when the 7 senior players, guys who had stood beside me in every huddle, met in the assistant coach's office without me and voted to submit a formal complaint packet to ownership. The complaint listed everything from fabricated locker room division to claims that I had become distracted by personal business interests. Attached were 3 doctored medical notes suggesting chronic fatigue that could affect team performance. None of it had been discussed with me. None of it had been raised in any captain's meeting. By 11:15 p.m., the general manager had signed off on the recommendation to void the extension. At 6:30 the next morning, my escrow account showed a 0 balance and a pending reversal. The league office confirmed the freeze would remain in place pending internal review. My mortgage servicer received notice of the lien that same day. I didn't yell. I didn't call anyone. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened the folder I had kept on my laptop since the day I signed my first Vanguard contract. Every bonus check I had ever redirected back into team initiatives was scanned and time-stamped. Every text thread where teammates asked me to cover their appearance fees was saved. Every bank transfer receipt showing my personal funds moving into club accounts was there in PDF form. I started a new spreadsheet titled simply Record. Column A, Date. Column B, Amount. Column C, Description. Column D, Supporting Document. By noon, I had 37 entries totaling over $3.9 million in documented contributions that had never been repaid or even acknowledged in my contract negotiations. I called my personal attorney, Rachel Kwan, a former MLS Players Association counsel who now ran her own sports litigation firm in Charlotte. She answered on the first ring. I read her the timeline. She asked for the contract PDF and the bank statements. Within 40 minutes, she had already pulled the league's collective bargaining agreement sections on fiduciary duties between players and club. Her first instruction was calm and precise. Do not speak to anyone from the team, do not delete any messages, and do not touch the escrow account even if they unfreeze it. She scheduled a 2 p.m. video call and told me to bring every piece of paper I had. That afternoon, we reviewed the secret meeting notes that had been accidentally forwarded to the equipment manager, who then forwarded them to me out of loyalty. The vote was recorded in a shared Google Doc. 7 names in favor, 4 against. My own name listed as absent. The recommendation language was clinical. Player leadership has created an unsustainable environment. Rachel highlighted the clause in the standard player contract that required any complaint affecting compensation to be presented to the player in writing with 30 days to respond. They had skipped that step entirely. She also flagged the image rights clause. My personal brand had generated an additional $1.65 million in revenue for the club over the previous 4 seasons through jersey sales, sponsor activations, and social media partnerships. None of that money had been credited back to my base salary calculations. Rachel made a note: potential unjust enrichment claim. By the end of the call, she had drafted a preservation letter demanding the club retain all electronic communications from the prior 90 days. She sent it by certified mail and email before we hung up. I spent the rest of that first day transferring every file to an encrypted external drive and making 3 physical copies. One stayed with me, one went into a safe deposit box at my local branch, and the third I overnighted to Rachel's office. The lien on my house sat there like a quiet threat, but I refused to let it dictate my next move. Instead, I opened a new checking account at a different bank, moved my remaining liquid assets, and set up automatic alerts for any activity on the frozen accounts. Small steps, but each one reinforced the boundary I was already drawing. That evening, I sat on my back porch and looked at the spreadsheet again. The numbers didn't lie. I had given everything to this club, and in return, they had tried to erase me with a 7-4 vote and a midnight freeze. The information gap was clear now. They believed I would simply accept the loss and walk away quietly. They had no idea how many receipts I actually held. I spent the next 3 weeks rebuilding the timeline with the same quiet precision I once used to prepare for derby matches. Every morning I sat at the same kitchen table, coffee black, laptop open, and added another row to the spreadsheet. By the time Rachel Kwan called for our second strategy session, the document had grown to 142 entries. Column E now tracked corresponding teammate communication, and column F listed club acknowledgement or lack thereof. Rachel joined the video call from her downtown Charlotte office, legal pad in front of her, glasses perched on her nose. She spoke in the same measured tone she used when reviewing contract clauses. Marcus, the numbers are cleaner than most cases I see. You personally covered $847,000 in performance incentives that the club later classified as team-building expenses. Another $1.35 million came from your own Nike and Adidas endorsement pools that you redirected into the Academy Scholarship Fund. The club never issued a single 1099 or reimbursement memo for any of it. She slid a scanned page across the shared screen. It was my 2022 bonus check for $425,000 after we made the conference semifinals. The memo line read, Leadership Supplement. On the club's internal ledger, the same amount appeared under Miscellaneous Player Relations. No corresponding deposit back to my account. Rachel circled the discrepancy with her cursor. This alone supports a claim for breach of implied covenant of good faith. Combined with the secret vote, we have a strong, tortious interference case against the 7 players individually. I asked the obvious question, how long until we file? She answered without hesitation. We file when the evidence is bulletproof, not when emotions peak. Right now, we're still in preservation mode. I've subpoenaed the club's Slack archives and the full audit trail on the escrow account. The league compliance officer has already acknowledged receipt of my preservation letter. They know this is moving past internal review. That same week, the first cracks appeared in their story. The equipment manager who had forwarded the Google Doc reached out through a mutual friend. He asked to meet at a coffee shop off I-85, away from anyone connected to the club. Over 2 black Americanos, he handed me a thumb drive. On it were the original medical notes before they were altered. The team physician had signed off on full clearance, no restrictions, only 4 days before the complaint packet was submitted. The revised versions listed persistent fatigue and possible long-term leadership burnout. Same doctor's digital signature, different body text. The equipment manager's hands shook slightly when he described how the senior players had pressured the training staff to stay silent. I thanked him, drove straight to Rachel's office, and watched her upload the files into the master evidence folder. She added a new tab labeled Medical Fraud Indicators. By the end of that meeting, we had affidavits from 2 assistant coaches and the academy director, each confirming that I had never missed a required leadership session, and that the scholarship fund I seeded with $680,000 of my own money had directly benefited 17 academy players who later earned first-team contracts. The financial picture sharpened further when my forensic accountant, a former IRS revenue agent named Daniel Park, joined the calls. He spent 4 days tracing the image rights revenue. Of the $1.65 million generated under my name, $940,000 had been deposited into a club-controlled marketing account. Only $210,000 had ever appeared in any report sent to my agent. The remaining $730,000 sat in a holding account labeled Vanguard Brand Development Reserve. Daniel produced a color-coded flowchart showing every transfer. Arrows pointed from my endorsement deals straight into that reserve, then branched off to bonus pools for 3 of the senior players who had voted against me. Rachel scheduled a formal demand letter for the following Monday. The letter itemized every dollar, attached every receipt, and gave the club 14 days to unfreeze the escrow account and reinstate the extension or face civil suit in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. She copied the MLS Players Association, the league's general counsel, and the 7 named players. The letter closed with a single sentence. Failure to cure will result in pursuit of all available remedies, including individual liability for tortious interference with contractual relations. I signed the final version at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 11:40 a.m., my phone lit up with a call from the club's general manager. I let it go to voicemail. The message was polite, almost conciliatory. He suggested a private meeting to clear the air. Rachel listened to the recording once, then instructed me to save it and add it to the evidence log under attempted settlement contact. No reply was sent. Instead, I spent that afternoon reviewing my own bank statements from the past 36 months. I found 12 separate occasions where I had covered hotel upgrades for road trips when the club budget ran short. Another $93,000 in medical copays for younger players whose insurance had lapsed. Each transaction had a corresponding text from a teammate thanking me and promising to square it later. None of them ever did. I added those rows without comment. The spreadsheet no longer felt like a record of loss. It felt like a map. Rachel called again that evening. Her voice carried the first hint of momentum. The league has opened a formal investigation under Article 12 of the CBA. They've requested all communications related to the Captain's Council meeting. We're no longer the only ones asking questions. I closed the laptop and stepped outside. The lien notice still sat on my counter, but the numbers were no longer just debts. They had become leverage. The same teammates who thought a 7-4 vote could erase 8 years of work were about to discover how thoroughly I had documented every single transaction. The information gap was widening, and I intended to keep it that way until the courtroom made it permanent. The demand letter landed like a quiet verdict. 14 days came and went with no response from the club beyond the single-line email acknowledging receipt. On day 15, Rachel Kwan filed the civil complaint in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. Case number 26 CVS-01472. Plaintiff, Marcus Hale. Defendants, Carolina Vanguard FC LLC. 7 named players and 3 unnamed John Does for the coaching staff who facilitated the altered medical reports. I drove downtown that morning with the final evidence binder on the passenger seat, 4 inches thick, every page tabbed and color-coded. Rachel met me in the courthouse lobby wearing a dark gray suit, no tie, hair pulled back. We filed the papers together. The clerk stamped each copy with the same mechanical thud. Breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, unjust enrichment, declaratory judgment on the validity of the extension. We asked for $9.2 million in compensatory damages, punitive damages to be determined at trial, and immediate injunctive relief to unfreeze the escrow account and lift the lien. Within 48 hours, the MLS Players Association formally joined as amicus curiae. Their counsel sent a letter to the league commissioner requesting an independent audit of all player-funded initiatives at Carolina Vanguard FC over the prior 5 seasons. The league compliance office responded by appointing a neutral investigator, a retired federal prosecutor named Elena Morales. She subpoenaed every bank record, every Slack channel, and every Google Drive folder the club had used since my signing. The 7 players received personal service at the training facility the following Tuesday. I wasn't there to watch, but the equipment manager later told me the scene was silent. No raised voices, just process servers handing out thick packets while the morning session continued on the far pitch. One of the named defendants, our starting holding midfielder, tried to refuse signature. The server simply left the documents at his feet and walked away. Legally served. Rachel scheduled our first discovery planning meeting for the next day. We sat in her conference room with Daniel Park, the forensic accountant, and 2 paralegals. The whiteboard filled quickly. Request for production number 1. All financial ledgers showing allocation of image rights revenue from 2021 through 2025. Request for production number 2. Complete audit trail of the escrow account from the moment the extension was signed. Interrogatories asking each defendant to list every communication they had with ownership regarding my leadership in the 90 days before the secret vote. The club's outside counsel responded with the standard stall tactics: motions to dismiss, motions for protective order, requests for extension. Rachel opposed every one with surgical precision, citing specific paragraphs in the CBA that required expedited resolution of compensation disputes. The judge, a former corporate litigator herself, granted most of our requests and set a tight discovery schedule: 60 days to produce all documents, 30 days for depositions. The first real break came during the club's document production. Buried in 14,872 pages of PDFs was an internal memo dated 3 weeks before the vote. It showed the general manager recommending approval of my extension and noting that Hale's personal financial support has been instrumental in maintaining cap compliance. The memo was never shared with me. 2 days later, bank records arrived showing a $275,000 transfer from the Brand Development Reserve into a player bonus pool the week after the vote. The recipients were 3 of the 7 who had voted against me. Daniel Park highlighted the transaction in red on his master spreadsheet and labeled it Post-Vote Distribution, Potential Kickback. I sat through every document review session without comment. When the altered medical notes appeared again in the production set, this time with metadata showing they had been edited at 8:12 p.m. on the night of the vote, Rachel added a new count to the complaint: fraud in the inducement. The judge allowed the amendment without hearing. Depositions began in the 3rd week of discovery. The first witness was the team physician. Under oath, he admitted the original clearance note had been replaced at the request of the assistant coach. When asked why, he cited team harmony concerns. Rachel showed him the metadata. He had no explanation. The court reporter's fingers never stopped moving. The equipment manager testified next. He confirmed the Google Doc had been created at 9:17 p.m. and that my name had been deliberately omitted from the invite list. When pressed on why he forwarded it to me, he simply said, because it was wrong. His voice stayed steady. No drama, just facts. The real pressure built when the league investigator, Elena Morales, issued her interim report. She found credible evidence of coordinated effort to influence compensation decisions outside the contractual process. The report recommended temporary suspension of the 7 players from all league activities pending full resolution. The commissioner acted within 48 hours. Practice suspensions were issued. Matchday bans followed for the next 2 fixtures. Ticket sales for the upcoming home game dropped 18% overnight. The local sports radio stations began running segments titled The Vanguard Reckoning. Through it all, I stayed silent in public. My only statement was the one Rachel drafted for the court filings. The facts would speak in the record. Privately, I continued updating the master spreadsheet. Every new document added another row. Every admission added another supporting exhibit. The information gap had become a chasm. One evening, after a long day of document review, Rachel walked me to the parking garage. She stopped at my car and spoke quietly. Marcus, the numbers don't lie, and the paper trail doesn't forget. We're past the point where they can spin this as a simple leadership dispute. This is now a financial crime with a soccer jersey on it. I nodded once, started the engine, and drove home under the highway lights. The lien on my house was still there, but the escrow account had been partially unfrozen by court order. $425,000 released as interim relief. I transferred it straight into the new account and left the rest untouched. The money was no longer the point. The boundaries were. The case was no longer about what they took from me. It was about what the court would make them give back, and what the league would take away from them in return. The depositions continued through the humid Charlotte summer, each one peeling back another layer of the coordinated effort. Rachel scheduled them in blocks, 3 mornings a week in a neutral conference room downtown, court reporter present, video running. I sat in the back, silent, watching the numbers and the lies line up against each other. The first senior player called was our longtime right back, a guy who had roomed with me on 37 road trips. Under oath, he claimed he couldn't recall the exact wording of the secret meeting. Rachel slid across the printed Google Doc, time-stamped and showing his edit history. He had typed the phrase leadership fatigue himself at 9:52 p.m. He stared at the page for 11 seconds before answering. I may have been present for that discussion. The court reporter typed every hesitation. Next came the assistant coach who had hosted the meeting in his office. He tried to distance himself, saying he was just providing a space for player input. Rachel played the Slack thread where he had written, "Let's keep Marcus out of this one. Better if it comes from the vets." The coach's face went pale under the fluorescent lights. He asked for a bathroom break. When he returned, his answers grew shorter and more careful. The real shift happened on day 9 of depositions, when the general manager took the stand. He arrived in a pressed suit, carrying a thin leather folder. Rachel began with the internal memo recommending my extension. She asked him to read the final paragraph aloud. He did, voice flat. Hale's continued presence is essential for both on-field performance and off-field financial stability. She then placed the post-vote bonus distribution report in front of him. The $275,000 transfer to 3 of the voting players was highlighted. She asked if that money had any connection to the recommendation to void my contract. He paused for 4 full seconds, then said, "I'm not at liberty to discuss internal bonus allocations." Rachel didn't raise her voice. She simply entered the bank records as Exhibit 47 and asked the court reporter to mark the exact transfer reference numbers. The general manager's lawyer objected. The objection was overruled. By the end of his deposition, the room felt heavier. Even the court reporter's fingers seemed to strike the keys with more weight. Daniel Park, our forensic accountant, spent the following 2 weeks building the master financial exhibit book. He reconciled every bank statement the club produced against my personal records. The discrepancies totaled $2.84 million in unaccounted player-funded contributions. He traced $1.12 million of image rights revenue that had been reclassified as club marketing expense and never credited back. He prepared color-coded charts showing the flow of funds, green arrows for money I contributed, red arrows for money that ended up in the pockets of the 7 defendants. The charts were simple, clean, and devastating when printed at 11 by 17. Rachel filed a motion for partial summary judgment on the unjust enrichment count. The supporting memorandum was 47 pages long, every paragraph tied to a specific exhibit number and bank transaction ID. The club responded with 112 pages of opposition. The judge scheduled oral argument for the following month and ordered both sides to submit their financial experts for a Daubert hearing. While the lawyers fought on paper, the league investigator Elena Morales issued her final report. 43 pages. She concluded that the secret vote violated Article 12, Section 3 of the CBA, that the medical notes had been materially altered, and that the image rights diversion constituted potential misappropriation. She recommended league-level sanctions, including fines, points deductions, and individual player suspensions up to 12 months. The Commissioner's Office acknowledged the report and set a hearing date for the following quarter. I received the report the same day the court released another $1.1 million from escrow as additional interim relief. I left $800,000 in the account as a show of good faith and moved the rest into a segregated litigation reserve. The lien on my house was formally lifted by court order 2 days later. The mortgage servicer sent a confirmation letter that I filed immediately in the master binder. The pressure on the 7 players became visible. Two of them hired separate counsel and filed cross-claims against the club, claiming they had been misled by management. Rachel opposed any severance of the cases, arguing the conspiracy was joint and several. The judge agreed and kept everyone in the same proceeding. One afternoon, after a particularly long document review session, Rachel and I sat alone in the conference room. The table was covered with open binders. She closed the one in front of her and said simply, "We have them on the numbers, Marcus. The testimony is locking it in. The only question left is how much they're willing to lose before they admit it." I looked at the stack of exhibits and nodded once. The spreadsheet now had 378 rows. Every row represented a decision I had made to put the club first. Every row was now evidence they could not erase. The courtroom was waiting. The league sanctions were waiting. The final accounting of what they tried to take and what they would have to return was waiting. I stood up, gathered my copies, and left the building into the late afternoon heat. The case had moved past anger months ago. It had become a quiet, methodical reclamation of every dollar, every boundary, and every year they thought they could steal with a 7-4 vote. The oral argument on the motion for partial summary judgment took place on a clear Thursday morning in late August. Mecklenburg County Superior Court, Courtroom 5B. I sat in the front row, directly behind Rachel Kwan, wearing a dark navy suit and the same watch I had worn the night of the vote. No notes, no expression. Just listening as the numbers were laid out like evidence on the pitch. Rachel stood first. She began without theatrics. "Your Honor, the undisputed facts show that Mr. Hale personally transferred $2.84 million into club-controlled accounts over 8 seasons. These transfers are documented by bank records, wire confirmations, and contemporaneous text messages from the defendants themselves. The club accepted those funds, used them to meet salary cap requirements and facility upgrades, and then, after Mr. Hale wired the final $1.2 million, orchestrated a secret 7-4 vote to void his signed $4.8 million extension. That is unjust enrichment under North Carolina law, plain and simple." She clicked to the first slide on the courtroom monitor. A clean flowchart in green and red. Green arrows, my contributions. Red arrows, the post-vote bonus pool. The judge leaned forward slightly. Rachel continued. Defense counsel asked the court to believe these funds were gifts. The record shows otherwise. Every transfer had an expectation of continued employment and compensation. When that expectation was deliberately destroyed by the defendant's coordinated actions, the law requires restitution. The club's lead attorney rose next. He argued good faith, player input, and management discretion. He claimed the medical notes were internal working documents. Rachel objected twice during his presentation, citing specific deposition testimony that contradicted him. The judge sustained both objections. When the argument ended, the judge did not take the matter under advisement for long. She ruled from the bench on the unjust enrichment count. The court finds no genuine issue of material fact as to the $2.84 million in documented contributions. Summary judgment is granted in favor of the plaintiff on count 3. The defendants shall file an accounting within 21 days detailing the current location and use of those funds. Restitution in that amount, plus prejudgment interest at 8% per annum, is hereby ordered. The courtroom stayed silent, except for the clerk's pen. Rachel simply said, "Thank you, Your Honor," and sat down. I remained still. The number $2.84 million now carried the weight of a court order. That same afternoon, the league hearing on sanctions began via Zoom. Commissioner's conference room in New York, with counsel for all parties present. Elena Morales presented her findings first. She walked through the altered medical notes, the metadata timestamps, and the financial diversions. The 7 players appeared one by one via video, each represented by counsel. Most declined to answer substantive questions, invoking their rights under the CBA. The commissioner listened without interruption, then announced the panel would deliberate and issue a written decision within 30 days. Back in Charlotte, discovery moved into its final phase. We deposed the remaining defendants. One of the voting players broke during cross-examination. When Rachel asked him to explain the text he sent the night of the vote, we finally got rid of the golden boy, he claimed it was locker room banter. Rachel played the full thread, including the replies from the other 6. The player's face flushed. He asked for a short recess. When he returned, his answers grew evasive. The court reporter recorded every word. The club's accounting finally arrived on the 21st day. It was incomplete. Daniel Park identified $417,000 still unaccounted for in the Brand Development Reserve. Rachel filed a motion to compel and for sanctions. The judge granted both, ordering daily fines of $5,000 until full compliance. The pressure increased. By mid-September, the league issued its ruling. 3 of the 7 players received 12-month suspensions without pay. 2 received 8-month suspensions. The remaining 2 were fined $250,000 each and placed on probation. The club itself was docked 6 points in the current standings and ordered to pay a $1.75 million league fine. The written decision cited systemic failure to uphold the integrity of player contracts and financial disclosures. The local news called it the largest player-related sanction in MLS history. I read the ruling at my kitchen table the same morning it dropped. The spreadsheet now had 461 rows. I added one more. League sanctions imposed, $1.75 million club fine plus player suspensions. Then I closed the laptop and went for a run along the greenway behind my house. The air felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because the boundaries were finally being enforced by people outside my control. The case was set for trial on the remaining counts in January. Rachel estimated another 4 to 6 weeks of testimony. The club had begun settlement talks, but their opening offer was $1.9 million, far below the $9.2 million we sought and the $2.84 million already awarded. Rachel rejected it in a single-paragraph response. The offer does not approach fair compensation for the documented harm and will not resolve the individual liability claims against the 7 players. I approved the rejection without hesitation. The goal had never been a quick payout. It was a full accounting, public vindication through the record, and permanent boundaries that no future teammate could cross without consequence. The courtroom calendar was marked. The remaining financial exhibits were boxed and ready. The league's sanctions had already taken pieces of their careers. What remained was the civil trial, where every wire transfer, every text, and every vote would be examined under oath, one fact at a time. I stood at the edge of the greenway that afternoon, watching the Catawba River move slowly south. The water didn't rush. It simply followed its course, carrying everything in its path. The same way the evidence was now moving through the system, unstoppable and precise. The next phase would be the longest, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The numbers had spoken once. They would speak again in open court. The trial opened on a cold Tuesday in mid-January. Courtroom 5B again, but this time the gallery was fuller. Local reporters, a few MLSPA representatives, and a handful of former Academy players sat quietly in the rows behind me. I took the same seat directly behind Rachel. No notes in my lap. Just the master binder on the table in front of her, tabs worn from months of use. Jury selection took 2 days, 12 regular jurors and 2 alternates, teachers, small business owners, a retired postal worker, a nurse. None were diehard soccer fans, which suited us. Rachel wanted people who understood bank statements and promises kept. The defense tried to strike anyone who had ever signed a contract. The judge denied most of those challenges. By Wednesday afternoon, we had our panel. Rachel's opening statement lasted 23 minutes. She stood at the podium without notes and spoke in the same calm tone she used in every strategy session. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next few weeks, you will hear about $2.84 million that Marcus Hale personally transferred into Carolina Vanguard FC accounts. You will see the bank wires with his name on them. You will read the text messages where the defendants thanked him for covering bonuses, facility upgrades, and scholarship funds. Then you will learn that after he wired the final $1.2 million, those same defendants held a secret 7-4 vote at 9:47 p.m. and recommended voiding his signed $4.8 million extension. The club acted on that vote the same night, freezing every dollar the league owed him and placing a $312,000 lien on his house. This is not a personality dispute. This is a financial betrayal documented in black and white. She clicked to the first exhibit. The wire confirmation for the $1.2 million transfer. Date, time, account numbers, my signature. The jury leaned in. The defense opening was shorter. They called it a leadership transition and claimed the club had every right to manage its roster. They avoided the money as much as possible. The contrast was clear even before the first witness. My testimony came on day 4. Rachel walked me through the timeline without drama. I described each major contribution, the exact dates, the amounts, and why I made them. When she asked about the night of the vote, I answered factually. I had just wired the final $1.2 million that afternoon. The extension had been signed and the first bonus deposited. At 9:47 p.m., the 7 defendants met without me and voted to recommend termination of my captaincy and blockage of the extension. By morning, the escrow account was frozen and the lien notice arrived. Rachel showed the Google Doc on the screen. My name listed as absent. 7 votes in favor. I identified each name. No raised voice, no accusation, just the record. Cross-examination lasted 2 hours. The defense tried to paint me as difficult, distracted, focused on personal brand. I answered every question with the same even tone and referred back to the exhibits when needed. When they asked why I kept such detailed records, I said simply, because I learned early that verbal promises in professional soccer are rarely enough. I protected the team by protecting the paper trail. The jury took notes. The defense called their first witnesses the following week. The general manager tried to claim the funds were voluntary gifts. Rachel cross-examined him with the internal memo that recommended my extension and praised my financial support. She read the paragraph aloud again. The manager shifted in his seat. When she asked about the $275,000 post-vote bonus pool, he invoked the Fifth Amendment on advice of counsel. The jury noticed. One of the suspended players testified next. He claimed the vote was spontaneous and about team chemistry. Rachel played the Slack thread where the meeting had been planned 3 days in advance and my exclusion discussed openly. She asked him to read his own message aloud. We finally got rid of the golden boy. He stared at the transcript for a long moment before the judge instructed him to answer. His voice was quieter on the way out. Daniel Park took the stand for 2 full days. He explained the forensic accounting in plain language. He used the color-coded charts, green money in, red money redirected. He walked the jury through each disputed transfer, referencing specific bank routing numbers and transaction IDs. When the defense tried to suggest the accounting was overly complicated, Daniel answered, "Money leaves a clear trail when you follow the actual bank records instead of the story people tell." The jury asked for copies of the charts during deliberations later. The medical fraud evidence came through the team physician and the metadata expert Rachel hired. The before and after notes were displayed side by side. The edit timestamps matched the exact window of the secret meeting. The jury passed the exhibits among themselves without prompting. On the final day of testimony, the club's counsel asked for a brief sidebar. The judge called both sides to the bench. After 10 minutes, they returned. The defense announced they were resting without calling additional witnesses. Rachel had no rebuttal. The case was ready for closing. Her closing argument was 19 minutes. She returned to the $1.2 million wire that triggered the vote. She reminded the jury of the frozen escrow, the lien, the altered documents, and the post-vote bonuses. She ended with a single question. If a player cannot trust his own teammates to honor the money he puts into the club, and cannot trust the club to follow its own contract, what is left of the game? The defense closing tried to separate the players from the club and minimize the financial harm. They asked the jury to award only nominal damages. The contrast felt deliberate. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 12 minutes. They returned with a unanimous verdict on all remaining counts. Breach of contract, yes. Tortious interference, yes. Fraud in the inducement, yes. They awarded $6.7 million in compensatory damages on top of the $2.84 million already granted on summary judgment. They added $2.1 million in punitive damages against the 7 players jointly and severally. The total judgment entered that afternoon was $11.64 million. The courtroom remained quiet as the clerk read the verdict. No celebration, just the sound of pens writing and the weight of the numbers settling. The judge thanked the jury and excused them. She then set a hearing for post-trial motions and enforcement of the judgment in 30 days. Rachel asked for immediate entry of judgment and continuation of the daily sanctions until full payment. The judge granted both. That evening, I drove home alone. The spreadsheet now held 512 rows. I added the final verdict line, closed the file, and placed the binder on the shelf in my office. The numbers had done their work. The court had drawn the line. The league sanctions remained in place. 3 players still sat out their full 12-month bans. The club had begun the process of selling assets to cover the combined league fine and civil judgment. Settlement talks resumed the next morning, this time with real numbers on the table. I listened to the first offer, $9.8 million cash plus waiver of any appeals. Rachel advised acceptance with one additional condition: a permanent bar on the 7 players from any future contact with me or any team I might join. The club agreed within 48 hours. The wire transfers began arriving in tranches over the following 3 weeks. Each one was documented and added to the final accounting. When the last payment cleared, I closed the litigation reserve account and transferred the balance into a new foundation for independent player development programs, something I would control completely. The boundaries were now permanent. No more redirected bonuses, no more unrecorded contributions, no more secret votes at 9:47 p.m. The paper trail had become the verdict had become the payment, and the payment had become the clean break. I stood on the same back porch where I had sat the night after the vote. The air was cooler now. The river in the distance moved at its own steady pace. The house was still mine, the lien long gone, the future no longer tied to the people who had tried to erase 8 years of work with a single coordinated decision. The game continued somewhere down the road, but my part in that particular chapter was finished. The numbers had spoken. The court had ruled. The boundaries were set. And for the first time in 14 months, I slept through the night without checking the spreadsheet even once. The settlement funds cleared in 3 tranches over 21 days. First $4.2 million on day 1, another $3.1 million on day 9, and the final $2.5 million plus accrued interest on day 20. Each wire came with its own confirmation number, which I logged in the now closed master spreadsheet before forwarding the documents to Rachel. The total civil judgment, $11.64 million, was satisfied in full without a single appeal filed. The club also paid the separate $1.75 million league fine directly to MLS, and the 6-point deduction stood for the remainder of the season. Rachel met me at her office the morning the final wire posted. She slid the satisfaction of judgment across the conference table, already signed by the judge and stamped by the clerk. "It's done, Marcus. The money is yours. The record is permanent." The 7 players remain suspended through the end of their terms, and the club has agreed in writing to a permanent no-contact order. Any violation triggers an automatic $500,000 liquidated damages clause enforceable in this same court. I read the document once, signed where indicated, and slid it back. No celebration, just the quiet click of the pen. She then handed me a separate folder containing the league's formal closure letter. The investigator, Elena Morales, had signed off on full compliance. The MLS Players Association issued a short public statement acknowledging the resolution and reminding all members that player-funded contributions must be properly documented and compensated. The statement never mentioned my name, but everyone in the league knew exactly which case it referenced. I left Rachel's office and drove to the bank. The litigation reserve account was closed. The funds moved into a new dedicated account titled Hale Independent Development, LLC. I kept $2.1 million in liquid reserves for living expenses and legal contingencies, then allocated the balance according to a plan I had written the week after the verdict. $3 million went into a scholarship endowment for academy players whose families could not afford travel or equipment. Another $2.4 million funded the construction of a private training facility on land I already owned 20 miles south of Charlotte. Neutral ground, no club affiliation, no shared ownership. The remaining amount went into a conservative investment portfolio managed by the same firm that had handled my endorsement money for years. Every allocation carried the same principle: full documentation, clear title, and zero reliance on anyone else's ledger. The no-contact order was enforced immediately. One of the suspended players tried to reach out through a mutual friend 2 weeks after the final payment. The message was polite on the surface, an offer to clear the air. I forwarded the text to Rachel without reply. She sent a single cease and desist letter the same afternoon, citing the settlement agreement, paragraph 14b. The friend never contacted me again. The boundary held without a single conversation. That same month, I began the physical work of separation. I sold the house that still carried memories of the lien notice taped to the front door. The closing happened on a Friday morning. I signed the documents, handed over the keys, and drove away with nothing but the title in my briefcase and the satisfaction of judgment in the glove compartment. I moved into a smaller, modern condo downtown, leased in the name of the LLC, utilities paid automatically, no shared team staff, no unexpected visitors. The new place had a small gym on the ground floor where I could train alone at 5 a.m. without explaining my schedule to anyone. The training facility project broke ground in early March. I hired a local architect who had never worked with any MLS club and a general contractor recommended by my accountant. The plans were straightforward: 2 full-size grass fields, 1 turf, a weight room, a recovery center, and a small classroom for financial literacy sessions. Every contract carried my personal signature and a clause requiring weekly progress reports with photographic evidence. No verbal assurances. No handshake deals. The first concrete pour happened on a Tuesday morning while I stood on the sideline with a hard hat and a clipboard. The site manager handed me the daily log. I signed it, took the photos myself, and uploaded them to the secure folder that only my new staff could access. I also rebuilt my professional life on paper. A new agency handled all endorsement negotiations. Every deal required a dedicated bank account and quarterly audits. Image rights were retained 100% in my name. No revenue flowed through any club entity. When a smaller USL club approached me about a playing comeback, I reviewed the contract with Rachel present. The offer was $1.8 million over 2 seasons with full guarantees. I declined. Not because of the money, but because the contract still contained a standard team harmony clause that could be twisted the same way the old one had been. Instead, I signed a 1-page consulting agreement with the same club to run specialized leadership sessions for their academy, paid hourly, documented, and terminable with 30 days' notice. Clear terms, easy exit, no risk of another 7-4 vote. The 7 players faded from the headlines as their suspensions ran their course. 3 of them never returned to MLS. 2 joined lower division sides on reduced salaries. The remaining 2 sat out the full year and resurfaced only in off-season workouts. I never saw any of them in person again. Their names appeared in my records only as line items in the final satisfaction of judgment. Defendant 1, $300,000 joint and several liability, and so on down the list. The spreadsheet stayed closed on the shelf. I no longer needed to open it. By late spring, the new facility was 60% complete. I hired 3 full-time coaches, none of whom had ever worked for Carolina Vanguard, and a part-time accountant who reviewed every invoice before payment. The first group of 20 academy prospects arrived for a free summer camp in June. I stood on the sideline and watched them run drills on the new grass. No captain's armband, no expectation that I would fund their bonuses or cover their hotel rooms. Just structured sessions, clear rules, and payment for services rendered. At the end of each day, the staff filed a short report. I read it, signed off, and filed it electronically. The system was simple, repeatable, and mine. One evening in early July, I drove out to the site after the last campers had left. The sun was low over the tree line, turning the unfinished stands a soft orange. I walked the length of the main field, grass still striped from the morning session. At midfield, I stopped and looked around. No secret meetings in assistant coaches' offices. No late-night votes. No frozen escrow accounts. Just dirt, steel beams, and a plan that could not be overturned by a 7-4 show of hands. The old club continued without me. They finished the season mid-table, the 6-point deduction having done its damage. Ownership changed hands in the offseason, and the new group quietly removed the old general manager. I read the announcement once in the local paper and then turned the page. The story no longer concerned me. My days now followed a steady rhythm. Morning training alone, afternoon meetings with contractors and accountants, evening review of the scholarship applications. Every transaction cleared through the LLC. Every decision carried a paper trail that started and ended with me. The boundaries were no longer defensive. They had become the foundation. I never spoke publicly about the case after the verdict. When reporters called, my new agency issued the same short statement. Mr. Hale is focused on his independent development programs and thanks the court and the league for resolving the matter. Nothing more. The silence was deliberate. The record already said everything that needed to be said. Standing on that unfinished field, I thought about the night I had wired the final $1.2 million and then watched it disappear into a frozen account by morning. The same money had now returned, multiplied by the judgment, and been put to work on ground that belonged only to the future I chose to build. No teammates to betray it, no club to redirect it, just clear titles, audited accounts, and hard lines drawn in the dirt. The facility would open fully in September. The first paying cohort was already waitlisted. The scholarships would support 32 kids the following year. The numbers were smaller now, but they were mine, documented and protected. I turned and walked back toward the parking area. The security gate clicked shut behind me with a solid, final sound. The old chapter had ended with a court stamp and a bank wire. The new one had begun with concrete and grass and a set of rules that no secret meeting could ever rewrite. The game would go on, but I would play it on my own terms. Paper trail intact, boundaries enforced, and every dollar accounted for before it ever left my control. The new facility opened its doors on the first Saturday in September under a clear Carolina sky. I stood at the main gate at 6:45 a.m., clipboard in hand, watching the first group of 28 prospects arrive with their parents. No press release had gone out, no social media announcement. Just an email to the families 2 weeks earlier with the schedule, the liability waiver, and the exact fee structure, $450 per week, paid in advance, non-refundable after day one. Every payment cleared through the LLC's merchant account and posted to a separate ledger before the kids even stepped on the grass. I greeted each family by name, shook hands, and directed them to the registration table where my new operations manager, a former college compliance officer named Lauren Reyes, scanned their forms and issued wristbands. No promises of first-team contracts, no talk of bonuses I would cover. Just structured sessions, documented attendance, and a financial literacy class every Thursday afternoon taught by Daniel Park himself. The curriculum was simple: how to read a bank statement, how to track image rights revenue, and how to insist on written agreements before you ever wire a dollar to anyone. By 8 a.m., the morning session was underway. I watched from the sideline as the 3 full-time coaches ran technical drills on the new grass. The fields held up perfectly. The turf on Field 2 stayed cool under the late summer sun. At 10:30 a.m., I stepped onto the pitch for a short passing circuit with the oldest group. No captain's armband, no speeches about loyalty, just crisp, one-touch work and quiet corrections when technique slipped. When the session ended, the staff filed the daily report on the secure tablet. I reviewed it, signed electronically, and uploaded it to the master drive. The system never varied. That same week, the final loose ends from the old case closed. The last 2 suspended players completed their probationary periods. Their agents sent formal letters requesting removal of the no-contact order. Rachel responded with a single sentence. The permanent bar remains in effect per paragraph 14B of the settlement agreement. No further discussion. The boundary stayed drawn. I used part of the remaining settlement funds to establish the Hale Development Trust. The trust document ran 47 pages, reviewed line by Rachel and a tax attorney. It funded the scholarships in perpetuity, with annual audits required and public disclosure of every grant awarded. The first 32 recipients were selected by a 3-person panel that included Lauren, Daniel, and a retired school principal, none of whom had ever worked for Carolina Vanguard. Applications required bank statements from the families, proof of academic standing, and a short essay on personal financial responsibility. The selection criteria were posted on the facility website in plain language. No exceptions, no back channels. By mid-October, the program had settled into a steady rhythm. Morning sessions for prospects, afternoon recovery and classroom work, evening adult leagues that generated additional revenue for the trust. Every invoice was paid within 10 days. Every revenue stream deposited the same day it cleared. I reviewed the monthly financial package every third Friday at 9 a.m. sharp. Daniel walked me through the numbers in the same conference room where we once built the case against the old club. The spreadsheets were cleaner now. Fewer rows, clearer categories, 0 unexplained transfers. When a vendor tried to invoice for services not rendered, Lauren caught it on day 2 and withheld payment until the corrected document arrived. The system worked because every participant understood the rules in advance. One quiet Sunday morning in late November, I walked the entire facility alone. The stands were still half finished, but the fields were pristine. The weight room smelled of fresh rubber flooring. The classroom whiteboard still carried the previous day's lesson. Never wire money without a signed agreement and a clear repayment schedule. I erased it, wrote the next week's topic, and stepped back. The words looked solid under the overhead lights. I thought about the night the escrow account had been frozen and the lien notice had arrived at 6:30 a.m. The same money that had disappeared that morning had now returned, grown, and been placed on ground I controlled completely. No secret Google Doc could erase it. No 7-4 vote could redirect it. The paper trail had become the foundation instead of the weapon. The old club announced a new captain in the off-season. His name meant nothing to me. I read the article once, closed the browser, and returned to the facility budget. Their season had ended with a first-round playoff exit. The 6-point deduction had done its work, and the new ownership was still cleaning up the financial mess left behind. I felt no satisfaction and no bitterness. Only the quiet recognition that the boundaries I had drawn had held. My own playing days were over, but the game continued through the kids on my fields. They arrived each morning with cleats and water bottles, left each evening with printed progress reports and updated bank ledgers for their families. Some would move on to college programs. Others would learn early that professional soccer rewards those who protect their own numbers. All of them would leave, knowing exactly where every dollar came from and where it went. In December, I signed the final documents for a small coaching certification partnership with a local university. The agreement was 8 pages long, every obligation spelled out, every payment schedule attached. I reviewed it with Rachel over a single video call. She made one minor change to the termination clause. I approved it, and the contract was executed the same afternoon. No handshakes, no verbal side deals, just signatures, PDFs, and automatic bank drafts. On the last day of the calendar year, I sat at the new desk in the facility office and closed the books for the quarter. Revenue from camps and adult leagues had covered 68% of operating costs. The trust covered the rest. The balance sheet showed a modest surplus. I transferred the surplus into the endowment account, filed the quarterly tax forms electronically, and shut down the computer. Outside, the fields were empty under the security lights. The gate was locked. The cameras recorded steady green status lights. I walked the perimeter once, checked the locks, and drove home to the condo. The drive took 12 minutes. No detours past the old training ground, no late-night texts from teammates asking for favors. Just the quiet hum of the highway and the knowledge that tomorrow's schedule was already printed and waiting on my desk. The betrayal that began with a $1.2 million wire and a 7-4 vote at 9:47 p.m. had ended with clear titles, audited accounts, and a facility that operated on rules no one could rewrite in secret. The money had been returned. The record had been made permanent. The boundaries had been set in concrete and grass and signed agreements. I no longer needed to look over my shoulder. The paper trail had done its final work, and the new chapter had begun exactly as I had drawn it, measured, documented, and entirely my own.